Hi, everyone. Welcome to our daily Native Wellness Power Hours. I'm happy to be your facilitator today. My name is Jillene, and I am a Ani from Fort Belknap, Montana. I currently live in Oregon. This is my backyard, the picture that's here. I'm also the executive director of the Native Wellness Institute. So I'm just making sure that this is on and going. So today our topic is on baggage and letting go. I love to talk about baggage and letting go. And when we talk about baggage and letting go, we're also talking about trauma. So I love talking about trauma because when we talk about trauma, we also have to talk about healing. And I love to talk about healing. So I'm
I love
going
talking
to
about trauma because
oops, sorry about that. I'm trying to share it so that others can join us. So welcome. This today is our week 54 of our Native Wellness Power Hours. So just a little bit before we get going here, the Native Wellness Institute, we are a national nonprofit organization. The IRS calls us a nonprofit. And what we like to call ourselves is a social profit because the work that we do is benefiting society. So we are celebrating our 21st anniversary this year. So we were founded in 2000, even though many of us have been doing this work for decades and decades. And myself, I have been doing this work, this kind of work since I was 19, and I'm now 55. So for over half of my life. And what I mean by this work is really helping our people connect the dots between trauma and behaviors, and then further helping our people connect the dots in understanding that healing is the answer to trauma. So that's what I mean by our work. So the Native Wellness Institute, then, we exist as an organization because of the lasting impacts of historical and intergenerational trauma. And just as importantly, we exist to help connect the dots, so help to have understanding and to provide opportunities for healing. So we can't heal people, but we can provide the tools so people can heal themselves. That's really what we're about. Um, and so we provide trainings and facilitate community gatherings and all of that kind of stuff. And just like you watching, we were greatly impacted by the pandemic as well. And, you know, the majority of our work is spent in communities all across the nation, um, into Canada every now and then, and even other places in the world, working with Indigenous people that have been impacted by colonization. And so of course we're on Zoom and Facebook Live, just like everyone else. And so thanks for tuning in. And actually our power hours, we call them our Native Wellness Power Hours. Today is our 309th power hour. We're in week 54. So way back when, in March of last year, after the country started shutting down, our calendar was like jam packed with all kinds of stuff. And then one by one, they were just being canceled, canceled, canceled. We were just like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? And we knew because of, because of our work and because we, profoundly understand trauma, we knew that this pandemic would be triggering and traumatizing for people. So we wanted to do our part. We wanted to contribute to that, to help our people get through this in a good way. And so we met as a staff, and then we met as a board, and we brainstormed, and we came up with these ideas to do these Native Wellness Power Hours. So we know that, one way to, to mitigate or to address trauma is to be consistent and have some predictability in our lives. And so we wanted to offer these daily. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, we offered them 7 days a week. We kind of wanted to be that anchor for folks, because we know also that frequency and duration are also good for trauma responses. We wanted to just keep these going. So we started out 7 days a week because we've never been in a pandemic and we didn't know how long we were going to be in a pandemic. we had no idea it would be like over a year. So we started out doing these 7 days a week. And then after about 4 months, we're like, okay, let's cut back here. Like we need a break on the weekends. So let's cut back here. So we cut back to 5 days a week. And that's what we've been doing since March 21st of 2020, is offering the daily Native Wellness Power Hours. And the intent, and and kind of the vision behind it is, while we're home quarantining, while our lives have been turned upside down, that we could offer you basically an hour-long workshop every day that would give you some tools, and some uplifting messaging and programming to help your own personal well-being and to help your own healing journeys. So that's what they're about. So awesome. We're so glad that you're here today. We have some regulars that tune in every day, and we're so happy that you do. So in the comment section, please introduce yourself and let us know where you're tuning in today. If people can share it on their social media, then the more people can tune in. So we go Facebook Live every day from the Native Wellness Institute's Facebook page, and then we also save all of the power hours onto our YouTube channel. And so, people from university classes to communities have gotten in touch with us and tell us that they use our power hours, in a variety of ways. So we're very grateful for that. So today's topic is on baggage and letting go. And so I just want to kind of like, oh, one thing I forgot to mention as well is, on our website, which is nativewellness.com, we also, we're selling some t-shirts, not this one. I'm actually wearing a sweatshirt that I bought for myself, which I rarely buy myself things, but this is from Bethany Yellowtail's collection. So I'm happy to give her a shout out today. She is, of course, one of our native clothing designers, an awesome human being. But we do have t-shirts and sweatshirts, crew neck sweatshirts and hoodies on sale on our website, nativewellness.com. And our t-shirts say things like, get your well on, healing is a verb, grandma up, healing people, heal people, shift happens. That's SHIFT, shift happens. And then our hoodies and our crew necks say, you are worthy, and it's backwards. And so when you look into a mirror, the message is for you that says you are worthy. And then on the back, it says we are worthy. So the sales of these t-shirts and sweaters go to help like fund this programming, because we're offering it for free for everyone. So awesome. Okay, that's my commercial out of the way. So let's dig in. Let's dive in here and talk about baggage. So when you hear that word baggage, like what do you think of? What do you think I'm talking about here? Like put it in the chat here. What are we talking about when we say baggage, right? So we can hear like different people will say things like, oh, they have a lot of baggage, right? um, um, so we're talking about, like, some people call it issues. Some people say it's like the residual stuff that we hold on to, maybe when traumatic things happen to us, right? So we're talking like the emotional baggage that we hold on to. And I always laugh because one time my daughter, she was probably like in the 4th grade or something like that. And she came home one day and she told me, she walks in the door and she's like, Mom, if you got an issue, get a tissue. And then she like walks off to her room. And so it just makes me crack up, because to me what that's saying is like, if you have some baggage that you need to let go of, like, crying is one way, right? So you got an issue, get a tissue. So today we'll be talking about baggage, and then how it impacts our lives, how it shows up, how some of us deal with it, and then how we can move through it in healthier ways. And so just to help us connect the dots a little bit more, oh, and I love it, people are putting some of our baggage is described as unfinished business. Somebody else said unnecessary weight that we carry with us, unfinished business from the past, like trauma and grief. Holding on to grudges. Yeah, awesome. That's exactly what we're talking about. So I'm actually going to share my screen because I want to share some pictures with you. Oh, let's see. I have too many windows open. So let me share my screen real quick. And okay, perfect. So this is why it's so important to talk about baggage and to understand and to connect the dots of how it impacts us, right? So this diagram here, if we take a look at the bottom and it says adverse childhood experiences, what this means is adverse childhood experiences. This is childhood trauma. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Like, what are we talking about? So when we experience childhood trauma, it like disrupts our neurodevelopment. That's like our brain and how our brain develops, right? And our brain like contributes to like everything about us, right? Including the way we think about our, our thought processes and all of that. So disrupted neurodevelopment then contributes to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. So it impacts the way that we express our emotions or the way we think and understand things, right? And in previous power hours, we've had several actually on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder as an example, and how when our mothers drink when we're inside of their womb, that's called neurotrauma, right? Because it's impacting our brain development. So then this then leads to the adoption of health risk behaviors. So what that means is behaviors that impact our health. Okay. So the flip side of this is what we try to use in our work is the language of healthy risk taking, which means taking risks that are good for us, right? I mean, like even you coming on here for an hour is an example of taking a healthy risk, right? Okay, so the adoption of behaviors that impact our health then contribute to disease and disability and social problems for us, which then lead to early death. This is why talking about baggage and letting go is so important. And what I'm really talking about here is understanding the baggage and where it comes from, and then doing some healing work to let it go, right? Because healing is the answer to trauma. So the adverse childhood experiences, in short, is called ACEs, right? And there's actually been lots of research done on this that helps us to connect the dots to trauma. And why this is so important and why it's so interesting is Kaiser Permanente really took the lead on this ACEs studies. And it kind of became, these buzzwords. And over the last, 5 or 10 years or whatever, federal agencies started like learning more about ACEs and all of the research behind it. And it helped them to connect the dots between trauma and like physical and mental health. So then pretty soon federal agencies started saying, oh, people need to be, trauma informed and, all of this. So many of us that have been doing this work for decades and decades, we already, we could see clearly how trauma impacted our people, right? It's in part, it's why we do the work that we do. And so what the ACEs research doesn't do is account for historical and intergenerational trauma, right? And sometimes only looking at like the current day trauma is more is more or easier accepted for people, right? Because even a lot of our own indigenous people don't believe in historical or intergenerational trauma, right? So what we're doing today is just, again, linking those dots to like our current day behaviors and then what we can do about it. So we can look in our own communities, whether we're in a tribal community or whether we're in an urban community. We can take a look at statistics from the Indian Health Service. We can look at statistics from our own tribal health programs or urban Indian health programs. We can take a look at statistics from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And what we'll see is that Native people um, are our age in which we die is way younger than the rest of America, right? And it's because of this diagram that I'm showing right here, right? It's because of childhood trauma and all of the things that it goes to. So I'm going to share when I'm talking about, the ACEs, there's actually a questionnaire that the ACEs research includes, but I'm not gonna give you the questionnaire, but I'm gonna talk to you about the types of abuses that contribute to adverse childhood experiences or childhood trauma. So we can take a look at these 3 areas that are up on the screen right now. Okay, so the first area is around abuse. So we can take a look at physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. Okay, these are childhood traumas that impact us, right? So a couple of things on abuse, especially around emotional abuse. A lot of people, we don't always understand what emotional abuse is, right? So for a child, as an example, even yelling at a child, right, is trauma. Yelling at a child is trauma. When adults in a home are watching um, horror movies, super scary movies on TV, like that can be trauma to a child as well. Right. So I'm just sharing these because sometimes we don't think our behaviors are traumatic, right? Because maybe we might enjoy scary movies or something, but to a 4-year-old brain or a 6-year-old, or 8-year-old child, like their brain is at a different place developmentally, right? And so they can't make the connections to like, oh, this is just on TV, these are just actors, right? Like this is real for them, and it can be traumatic. So we can think about all the ways that we may have experienced abuse that we never knew was abuse, right? Because that's just how it was, or that's how our home was and everybody else's home, right? So physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Another area with the ACEs study looked at neglect. So they looked at like physical neglect and emotional neglect. So for example, nobody ever took me to the dentist, to check on my teeth, right? Um, Nobody ever asked me how I was doing or held me or hugged me or comforted me, right? Like things like this. These are also abuse. And then we have what they identified as what they called household dysfunction. Sometimes I don't like that word dysfunction. Because even our most dysfunctional situations, there's still some level of functionality, but everybody knows what we mean when we say that word dysfunction. So if your home, for example, had somebody that experienced mental illness or were incarcerated or violent was in the home, especially when the mother was treated violently, and that's either physical violence, but also verbal as well. Or if there was substance abuse or even divorce in the home, these are other examples of childhood trauma. So when we experience these things as a child, This in part is what contributes to the baggage that we may carry as an adult. Okay, so if we've experienced that trauma, it's going to contribute to the baggage that we carry as an adult. Does that make sense? So this is what I mean by when we talk about trying to connect the dots. So we're trying to connect the dots to the things that we experience as a child, and that goes without healing, then we carry that into adulthood, and we carry it around in these invisible bags, right? So there's many different ways that trauma plays out. Okay, and I actually have I have this prop. We can't see it very good, but this is a gigantic bag. I have my screensaver on, but this is a gigantic bag. It actually looks like a gigantic Ziploc bag. It actually is a great big Ziploc bag. So I just have that as an example because some of us are carrying around these gigantic bags. That's how much baggage we have, right? We're carrying around these gigantic bags, and we're full of all the kind of stuff that we hold on to, right? Maybe we're holding on to shame because maybe the neglect that we experienced as a child was like nobody washed our clothes, and we're wearing dirty clothes to school every day, and when we go to school people tease us, right? Because we have stains on our shirts. Or maybe the neglect was no one even bought us new clothes or new shoes, right? And we're still wearing these beat up holy shoes or whatever, and so we're still holding on to like that shame, right? And so that's an example of the baggage that some of us are still carrying around in our bags, right? And so another one might be resentment. We might be holding on to resentment. So something that may have happened decades ago, and we're still holding on to that, and that becomes part of our baggage that we carry around. Some of us, maybe we're 40 years old today, but when we were 6, you know, somebody significant in our life passed away, and our family didn't know how to grieve, and our family didn't know how to get through that, and so we're still holding on to that grief. So I'm not talking about like sadness over losing somebody. It's the grief that we hold on to, right? And maybe that's what's modeled in our home. So part of our baggage might be this unresolved grief that we're holding on to. Or we might be, someone said grudges, right? Like a lot of our people are super, super good at holding on to grudges, right? And that might be part of our baggage. Or some of us might be holding on to anger. And it might have been something that happened, you know, a week or a month or years or even decades ago, right? That anger might have turned into rage even. And that becomes part of the baggage that we hold on to. And some of us are holding on to all of that stuff plus more, right? And some of us might be even holding on to our parents' baggage or our grandparents' baggage or our ancestors' baggage, right? So we think about all the stuff that we're holding on to, and then how that impacts us today, right? So it's kind of like we have this invisible backpack that's on, and wherever we go, there we come with all of our baggage. And it doesn't matter if we're sitting in our living room with the people that we live with, or we go to the basketball game, or we go to the grocery store, or we're sitting in the front pew at church, or we're sitting in the back of the sweat lodge. Like, it doesn't matter. There we are with all of our baggage. Does that make sense? And so it impacts us, right? Just like that diagram that I showed, it impacts us. That's why our life expectancy as tribal people is so low, because all of that is impacted to our physical and our mental well-being. So this is why I wanted to talk about this today, so we can like connect the dots and engage in our own healing. And I have a super exciting announcement that I'm going to make at the end regarding more opportunities for healing. So of course, we talked about the power hours are opportunities for healing. And again, you can go back and take a look. So I'm going to share my screen again, because this diagram here, when we hold on to baggage, it comes out in many different ways. And here's an example of how it does that. So these are possible risk outcomes, right? When we hold on to that baggage for so long. Lack of physical activity, right? Because we just don't have the motivation. It could come out as smoking, alcoholism, drug abuse, missed work, right? So when we have all of this stuff that we hold on to, the shame, guilt, resentment, abandonment, because maybe we were put in foster care, as an example, when we hold on to regret, when we hold on to, guilt and anger and grief and rage and all of that kind of stuff, we may try to deal with it in the best way that we know how. We may try to deal with it the way that has been modeled for us, right? And sometimes that does take the form of like smoking, as an example, smoking all kinds of stuff, or drinking, as an example, right? And we hear stories of our people over and over and over. They drink to numb that pain, right? Because carrying around all this baggage all the time, it impacts the way we think, right? That baggage that we carry around like contributes to sometimes the negative self-talk that we say in our head that repeats over and over and over and over, right? Or all the other thoughts that are in our head. So many of our people turn to alcohol because it drowns out those tapes, right? It slows those tapes down, or it stops them. Or we might turn to other drugs for the same thing. Like these might be the coping mechanisms that we turn to. And sometimes we might turn to ice cream as a coping mechanism. Sometimes we might turn to, online shopping as a coping mechanisms. Sometimes we might turn to gambling as a coping mechanism, right? So we can see in these different coping mechanisms, some are more socially acceptable than others, right? So for example, eating a gallon of ice cream might be in one setting by yourself, might be more socially acceptable than sitting there and slamming a fifth of whiskey, as an example, right? But there's still things that we're doing to cope, right? We may do other things to cope. Maybe we run, right? There's all kinds of things that we do to help. To help ourselves deal with it. So other possible risk outcomes when we don't work on our healing and we carry all this baggage around, severe obesity, diabetes, depression, thinking about taking our own lives, sexually transmitted diseases or infections, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, broken bones, maybe because we're not wearing our seatbelt or we're speeding or, getting into accidents and things like that. So we can take a look at all of these areas and we can look at, again, all of the data that's available for our people and our communities. We have high rates of all of these things. We have high rates of obesity. We have high rates of diabetes and depression, all of this kind of stuff. And it's linked to the trauma and the baggage that we carry around. Does that make sense? So again, like we're connecting the dots right here. That's what we're doing. We're connecting the dots. So, and the reason we're connecting the dots is because we want to get to the place where we're really embracing like that historical wisdom and that historical resiliency. So we hear a lot about those words, historical trauma or intergenerational trauma, right? Like we hear those words a lot. And one of the lasting impacts of trauma actually is like chronic negativity, like focusing on the negativity. And that negativity becomes something that we carry around as baggage, chronic negativity. Like, you know, wah, wah, everything is, the glass is always half empty or totally empty, you know, everything is always wrong, or if we try something it'll go wrong because that's what it always does. Like those are examples of chronic negativity, right? Where or we always complain, something's always wrong, you know, all of that kind of stuff are examples of chronic negativity, and that could become part of our baggage that we carry around with us as well, right? So when I go through the world, I have what I call my trauma and healing lens on. Like I see the world through my trauma and healing lens, right? And so when I see other people's trauma play out, like chronic negativity as an example, right? Um, I have a little bit more patience and compassion for them because it makes me think, you know, wow, what was what's their story, what's their story about, what's making them be this chronically negative person, right? So I have that patience and understanding and compassion for them. Or if their behaviors are directed at me, I don't take it personal, right? Even though it's literally if they're attacking me in some way, I don't take it personal because I still understand that's their trauma that's coming out. But what I can use is my discernment, and I can set boundaries for myself, right? Where I'm going to limit myself to having exposure to that person, right? So I can set boundaries for myself. So so the baggage, so we're carrying around all of this stuff, right? And the more we carry it, like the more tired we get, you know. And there's that saying even like, oh, I'm tired of being tired, right? And some of our people go their whole lives without connecting these dots and without realizing they can do something about it. Like we can do something about dealing with our baggage, right? And that's the healing piece. This is where healing comes in, because healing is the answer to trauma. Healing is the answer to trauma. So we can actually take these big massive bags that some of us are carrying around, and we can start downsizing. We can start downsizing our bags, right? So maybe that big giant bag is going to turn into like a smaller bag like this, right? And how we're going to downsize is by letting go of the stuff that we're carrying. So this starts by like having the awareness, right? Having the awareness of what we're carrying around. And so first, that awareness comes from understanding trauma, right? Understanding if these certain things happen to you as a child, the ones that I went over in the beginning, then I could be carrying around some baggage, right? So you could do self-reflection and like sitting in silence and really thinking about your childhood, thinking about how do I operate in the world, right? How do people see me in the world? Because sometimes um we don't have that awareness, right? Or we don't know these things that we're carrying and how we're impacting our space. Does that make sense? So the self-reflection is one tool that we can use to like really be honest with ourselves and take an honest look at ourselves. The other thing that we can do is we can read, right? You can literally get online and Google anything to learn more about it, right? Or we can read books. Like I love to learn about trauma because it helps me to better see myself, and it helps me to better see other people. And because of our common history as tribal people, right? When we, the loss of land as an example, the loss of life, the loss of way of life. Those are all examples of huge traumas that have impacted our people. And when that goes unhealed, the residual effects of that gets passed on to the next generation. And when that goes unhealed and more trauma is even added, that gets passed to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. That's what intergenerational trauma is all about, right? And it plays out everywhere. It plays out in our families, in our workplaces. So I like to learn more about trauma. So I'll jump online and I'll watch videos from certain people who like study this and teach about it. I'll read books. I've read lots of really good books to help me understand it's not you, it's what happened to you. That's a really good book that I've read. Another one that I've read, Shame and Guilt by Jane Middleton Maz. Jane Middleton Maz has done tons of work in Indian country, and a lot of her research has really helped our work and helping people connect the dots. I just started this one, decolonizing trauma work. So I'm just now getting into this one. And then I'm actually going to start this one this weekend called The Body Keeps the Score. So later I'll do another power on this one and I'll tell you the findings on that one. So I love to learn more about it and helping people connect the dots. So when we downsize, right, from these big gigantic bags of all of our baggage, all of our stuff, all of our, stuff that we pack around, it makes us tired. But healing is the answer. So that's the letting go piece, right? Letting go is really about healing. And we can do that in a number of ways. So after we have done this self-reflection or read some books or watched some videos, and we have this idea about like, oh, dang, I have a lot of stuff that I'm packing around. And I have embraced the fact that I'm an amazing human being and I want to be happy and I want to give myself permission to be happy and have joy in my life. So I want to let go of some of this stuff. So all those things that I just said, like, let's just repeat some of those a little bit, right? I know I'm an amazing person and I want to be happy and I want to live a life of joy. So many of our people like don't think that or don't believe that, right? Or don't think that they're worthy of happiness. A lot of our people think that way, right? So in our self-reflection and looking at all the baggage that we're hanging on to, we're hanging on to it for a reason, right? We're hanging on to it for a reason. It's like it's doing something for us. So when we're doing our reflection and our deep thinking about that, like, why am I hanging on to that? Why am I still, you know, angry at somebody that something that they did 40 years ago? Like, why am I still holding on to that today? Right? So even thinking about why do I hold on to this stuff and figuring out what is the stuff that I'm holding on to, right? So when we get this all figured out, there's things that we can do to let it go. One, we can give ourselves permission to heal, right? It's okay to heal. And healing, right, is becoming whole physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, right? So we can do things to let that go. And what works for me may not work for you, right? That's why there's like millions of things that we can do to help us to let go. Like literally, there's millions of things. So if you try something and it doesn't work for you, don't let the trauma take over and say, see, I tried to let go and it didn't work. And then you just continue to carry your baggage around for another decade. It's like, well, if that didn't work, then try something else, right? Okay, so here's some examples. We could journal, right? We could get just a simple, you could get a simple notebook, cost 99 cents. You don't have to get a fancy journal or fancy pens. You could get a simple notebook like this. And if you don't like to write, then draw pictures, right? What are the things that you want to let go of, right? Grief, maybe. And you're gonna start there. And you're gonna write in your journal about how you want to let go of that. You're ready to let go of that now, right? Or maybe you want to let go of some anger or resentment. So you might journal about that. You might even take it a step further and tear a page out of your journal and crumple it all up, rip it out of your journal, crumple it all up, and throw it away. Or you might take a step further and write all these things like in really hard, big marker of the things that you want to get rid of, and rip it out of your notebook again, fold it, crunch it all up. And this time you might get a big pan on your stove and catch this on fire inside your pan, or put it in the wood stove, or put it in the fire, or take it outside and like literally burn it as a way to just like watch it go up in flames. So you're like letting it go, right? And what happens oftentimes, because we're human, is that with our minds, we might start thinking about a certain incident or a certain time again, and we might bring all that emotion right back. We just got it out of our bag, and now with our thoughts, we're thinking about it and we just brought it right back, right? And that's okay. Like that's okay. We don't have to beat up ourselves over it. It just means that we can let it go again, right? And sometimes we got to let it go again and again and again and again until we like really let it go. Okay. So the whole journal thing, or writing it down and burning it or throwing it away, like, that might not work for you. And that's totally fine, right? So maybe you're going to try something else. Maybe you're going to go for a walk, or you're going to go for a run. And in that, in silence, and you're going to be thinking about whatever it is that you want to let go of, right? Why am I holding on to this? Okay, I'm going to give myself permission to let go. I'm going to thank it because it did something for me. That's why I held on to it for so long. But with every step I take in this walk or run, I'm going to visualize that I'm just letting go of that anger. Every step on this walk or run, I'm going to visualize it just going into the earth, right? And pretty soon I've walked a mile, or maybe I've walked 2 miles or 3 miles or 5 miles. And by the end, like I feel lighter. Like my big gigantic bag can be downsized, right? Or some of you might be like, I can't walk, I can't run. Like, okay, well, don't do that. Try something else, right? And maybe some of you are going to reach out to a professional, and you're going to see a therapist or a counselor, and you're going to ask them for help, right? You're going to ask them for some tools, because that's what they're there for, right? Is to give you some tools to help you to let go. If that's what you're going for them, if that's what you're going to them for. Or you might want to go talk to a friend, a trusted friend, right? That might do the same thing and help you to let go of things. Or you might go to church, or you might go into ceremony and you might let it go there, right? Or you might just go sit outside and sit on the earth and and give it to the earth. Or you might go to the water, right? And you might pick up a leaf, and you might just hold this leaf for a little bit and think about, what is it that I'm ready to let go of today? I'm going to give it to this leaf. And then you might just put the leaf in the water and watch that leaf float down the river. And if you're not by water or you're not by a river, then you can visualize it in your head, right? Like this is how powerful we are. We can think about holding this leaf and giving this leaf this anger that I've been holding on to. And I'm going to put it in, then I'm going to thank it, right? Like, thank you. I'm letting you go now. And then you can visualize this leaf in the water and it's going, and then it goes over this big waterfall, right? So these are just a couple of examples about letting go. Like literally, like I said, there's millions of things that we can do to help us let go. But the important thing is doing something, right? And then not beating ourselves up when we start thinking about this stuff and we start filling our bag up again, right? It just means that we have to let go again and let go again and let go again. And then pretty soon, guess what's going to happen? We're going to become good at letting go just because we've practiced it, right? Just like when we want to, be a better anything, be a better free throw shooter, we're going to practice until we become better at it, right? Well, we can practice letting go and practice letting go and practice letting go, right? Until we become good at it. And then that coupled with really understanding trauma and other people's behavior, when we start looking at our behavior, we can clearly see it in other people. And it doesn't mean that we do that to judge other people, right? When we can clearly see something in someone else and we may let that bother us, it's really, we're seeing a reflection of ourselves is what we're doing, right? So this is where that patience and that compassion comes in. So anyway, some things to think about. So we started out with this gigantic bag and then we downsized to a smaller bag. And then sometimes we can even downsize to an even smaller bag, right? This is my little purse here. And it has a little strap. I can easily put it on. And I would say my baggage fits in a little bag like this. Like, am I perfect? No. I always say, just ask my kids. They'll tell you. But when we downsize to a smaller bag like this, guess what happens? We create the space for that joy that we talked about. We create the space for compassion. We create the space for happiness. We create the space, like literally, like in our heads, we create the space where we can say things like, yes, I'm awesome and I want to feel good. And guess what? In my world, you're awesome too. And so are they, and so are they, and so are they, and so are they. Like, I want to live in a world where I'm surrounded by awesome people. And in my world, there's enough room. Like, look at all this room behind me. Look at all this space. In my world, there's enough room for all of us to be awesome. And I want my kids to have friends that are awesome, right? I want them to have relationships with people that are awesome, right? There's enough room in the world for all of us to be awesome. And that's what happens when we start letting go. Like, we believe these things, right? And I always think back to, our ancestors and the world that they lived in. And this is how I think they lived, right? Knowing that they were awesome and knowing that everybody else is awesome as well, right? So I just think that's awesome. And I say that word a lot. So the power of letting go is like so powerful. Now imagine this. So all of us tuning in today probably have been to a meeting or a family gathering where you went into the space and like you could feel everyone's baggage, right? You could feel the resentment, the anger, the shame, the guilt, the whatever, right? Like you could feel all of this. Okay. And I always ask the question, how many people enjoy like being around people that are carrying all of this baggage, right? How many people enjoy this stuff being directed at them, right? Okay, so we all have that experience. Now imagine like the flip side of that, right? Imagine a world where everyone has went from these gigantic bags to these smaller bags to even these smaller bags, right? And Instead, have replaced that with the joy and the love and the kindness and the compassion. Imagine living in a world like that. And some of us have created those worlds, right? Because we've made change. We've made change in our family systems, and we automatically gravitate towards other people who are doing the same. So maybe our extended family members and our friend circles and even the places that we work, we're hanging out with people that have downsized their bags. And so when we hang out together, guess what we're doing? Guess what we're talking about? Like, we're not talking about each other and putting each other down, right? We're not gossiping and talking about, our ailments and what frustrates us. We're talking about ideas, and we're talking about, these visions that we have for ourselves and our families, and how can we make those, come to fruition. That's what happens when we start getting rid of our baggage. It like opens up all kinds of stuff, right? That's the power of healing. So here's the interesting thing. One interesting thing about trauma. Trauma contributes to people being raised with these unspoken rules, and these unspoken rules of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. So all of the stuff that I talked about in the beginning, the abuse and all of that, well, sometimes we grow up not to talk about that, right? Because maybe we tried to and we got hit, or we got shamed, or we got blamed, right? So we learn real quick, like, not to talk about things, right? Or we learn not to trust. And that stems from, the childhood, adverse childhood experiences as well, the childhood trauma as well. We learn not to trust, right? Because maybe our parents or whoever raised us kept saying, yes, on payday you'll get new shoes, and 2 years later, and our toes are like this in our shoes. Or somebody came into our home and did something to us that they shouldn't have done, right? So we learn not to trust. And then we learn not to feel, because when we feel, it hurts, right? And as human beings, naturally, like biologically, we do things to make us feel good. So we don't want to feel, because when we feel our feelings, it hurts. So we learn not to talk, not to trust, and not to feel. And these unspoken rules are what keeps so many of our people from healing, right? But now, guess what? Like, that's changing. The norms are changing. But people are saying that word healing like way more than it used to, right? Like, lots of people are saying healing. So even us, like, we want to say that word a lot because we want to normalize healing, right? Our ancestors normalized healing. It was just everything they did. Did our ancestors live out of balance? Yes. And they had the protocols to get back into balance, right? That's what healing does. It simply helps us to put us back into balance. And what many of us have done is we've made trauma this big bad thing that we can't talk about or can't do, and we just endure years and years and decades of carrying around all of this baggage, right? So now let's normalize opening up those bags and taking a look and start taking things out. And sometimes we do that. We open up our bags and we look in there, we take something out, and we might put it back in and carry that bag for another year until we're like ready, right? Until we're ready to like move through it. And so we just also have to give ourselves grace. There are spontaneous healing moments where it can go like that. And then sometimes it might take a few minutes or a few days or a few weeks or a few months or even a few years to like move through all of this stuff. And whatever your pace is, it's just that. It's your pace, and it's okay. So I knew the time would go by so fast. It always does. Maybe I'll do a part 2 on this because there were some things I didn't get to that I wanted to talk about. Of I wanted to give more examples of how our baggage plays out, like in the workspace and in families and things like that. And then next time we'll talk about the more tools of the letting go. I gave you some examples, and you could even think about your own examples. But I have a super awesome announcement that I want to make. If you are a person that is carrying around this gigantic bag of stuff, of baggage, and this pandemic has given you the time to think and reflect and make you believe like, I am ready to let this go. I want to have more joy in my life. I want to laugh more. I want to be creative, all of that. Well, we have an opportunity for you. So, the Native Wellness Institute has received some funding from the Indian Collective, and we're going to create what we're calling communities of healing. So, if you're interested in starting or refreshing or nurturing your healing journey, like, just watch out. We're going to have a flyer that's going to be coming out, and that's going to tell you how to be involved, but it's going to be all on Zoom, all online. We're going to create these communities online, and it's going to be different communities. So it's going to be young people and older people and different genders and all of that. We're going to create these communities to do intentional healing work, right? So if you're interested in that, just what we'll have another power hour specifically on that. But it's going to help people who are serious about their healing journeys and just want some additional guidance around that. That's what these communities are going to be about. So that was my exciting news that will be coming up. We'll have a specific power hour just on that. So stay tuned. So thank you for tuning in today. Today is Friday. This is our week 54. Today was our 309th power hour. If you're also interested in refreshing and nurturing or starting your healing journey, like, go binge watch all of our power hours. You can go to YouTube, our YouTube channel, Native Wellness Institute, and check them out and cruise through the titles and things that you want to learn more about, tune into them, right? And I hope that, we're in spring. Many people celebrate the Easter weekend this weekend. It is a time of renewal, right? Renewal and rebirth. And that's what healing is. Healing is like a gift to ourselves, right? And it's a gift to our families and those that we love. It's even a gift to our ancestors as well, and a way to pay respect and homage. So have an awesome weekend. You are awesome. Repeat that 10 times. I am awesome. And then act accordingly. All right. Thanks, everyone. We will see you next week with another round of Native Wellness Power Hours. Take care.